Last month, I found a field telegram folded inside an old envelope, the kind that looks like it was meant to be opened with shaking hands. It wasn't addressed to me. It was meant for a Soviet sapper named Lev Arsenyevich, and it was signed, barely, by a signals lieutenant who didn't waste ink on politeness. One private call sign was stamped across the top, as if the sender knew Lev would read faster if the message hit him where it hurt. Waterman. The paper is missing the map reference for the entry shaft. There's just a blank where the access point should be. And that one absence is what sent me digging. So I called an archivist in Wrocław and booked the earliest train I could, because if you can't find where a man went underground, you can't understand what he did down there. May 5th, 1945. On the southern ring of Soviet trenches outside Breslau, Sergeant Lev Arsenyevich was pulled from an anti-tank ditch by a staff runner who spoke his name as if it were an assignment and a warning. Lev was a sapper now, but his hands had once been paid to understand water, how it moved, how it failed, how a city depended on it without ever thinking to be grateful. The command post was a cellar lit by one trembling lamp. A map of the city lay on a table, blurred by smoke and fingerprints. A staff officer shoved a folded intercept into Lev's hands. "SS demolition team," the officer said. "They're going to destroy a water hub, number 18, and they're dumping industrial phenols into the main reservoir before they blow the gear. If the poison gets pressurized into the network, the people hiding underground die, and our own supply points go bad when we move in." Lev read it twice, because the idea felt too deliberate even for a war. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "How long?" "Hours. Maybe less." The officer tapped the map. "We can't flatten the district. Too many civilians are under there. Too many of ours will drink from those lines. You go under, you stop it. Quiet." Quiet meant no artillery, no tanks, no easy victory. Quiet meant a man alone with pipes and darkness and whatever the enemy left behind. The officer added one more sentence, softer, pretending to be guidance. "You will not delay for civilians." Lev nodded, because nodding cost less than arguing. He was given 2 men with ROKS-3 flamethrowers, minimal tools and no promise of extraction. Before he left, he touched the old canteen at his belt, dented, nearly empty, a relic from the life he had lost. A line of Cyrillic was scratched into its metal, Professor Popov's handwriting from the university days, when pressure and flow were problems with clean answers. They entered the city's underworld through a maintenance shaft in the south. The first meters were modern concrete. Then the walls turned to older brickwork, damp and salt-stained, the kind built when Prussian engineers believed civic systems would outlast politics. Lev's lamp carved a narrow tunnel of light. Water dripped steadily. The air tasted of rot and soot, and underneath it all, a sharper edge. The faint, wrong bite of industrial chemicals. A fork appeared. Maps were useless down here. Sieges turned streets and tunnels into guesses. Lev crouched, pressed his palm to the wet floor, and listened the way he used to listen at pump stations. Not for voices, but for flow. Left carried a deeper, steady rush, water moving somewhere with purpose, right held only stagnant drip. He chose left. They had gone 20 paces when a thin wire snapped under Kuznetsov's boot. The sound was tiny, childish. Lev froze. He saw fine, dry sand patterns scattered on the damp floor. An unnatural dusting meant to show vibration. Not a pressure plate, a vibration trigger. "Down," Lev whispered. They crouched, tanks thudding softly. No explosion came. The corridor felt tense, waiting. Mikhailov, the hard-eyed one, breathed through his teeth. "Youth, toys," he muttered, trying to sound fearless. Lev's mind narrowed. Backing out would burn time they did not have. Pushing forward could collapse the tunnel and bury them with it. He searched the wall for something he could control, valves, equalizers, anything that could change the environment instead of begging it to spare them, and found an iron wheel half rusted into a junction box. Pressure equalization. If vibration was the trigger, then vibration could be forced, on his terms, at a distance. He crawled to the wheel and turned. Rust fought him, then yielded with a squeal that sounded too loud. He opened it wider, letting water surge through a sideline. A dull thump rolled from ahead, an explosion muffled by earth and wet brick. Dust breathed from the ceiling. A few clumps of mud fell and splattered near their boots. The trap had gone off early, away from them, and the path ahead was suddenly usable again. The trade came immediately, the noise travelled, and the ceiling now carried a fresh crack that shed grit like slow snow. They moved, careful and quick. The corridor narrowed into a choke point where brick had slumped inward. Kuznetsov tried to squeeze through first. His flamethrower tank scraped the wall, echoing like a confession. Lev's lamp caught a sheen on the tank, fuel leaking in a thin line. Lev grabbed his shoulder. Slow. Kuznetsov's face was pale under soot. It's leaking. I see it. Lev pressed a rag to the seam. It slowed the drip, but could not stop it. Fuel and damaged wiring were a marriage made for funerals, and the deeper they went, the fewer exits the city would allow. Beyond the choke point, the air changed. Less sewage, more human breath. Lev swung his lamp and found a side chamber. Children, 5 or 6, huddled against the wall, eyes too large in dirty faces. The oldest held a tin cup with both hands, as if it were a weapon. The boy's gaze locked on Lev's canteen. Mikhailov leaned close, voice low and cutting. We don't have time. We don't have water. Lev did not answer at once. He felt the officer's warning hovering above his shoulder. He felt Popov's old lessons too. Water did not choose sides, and neither did contamination. He imagined phenols pushed through the network, moving faster than any soldier could run, killing people who had survived months of shells by hiding underground. He imagined Soviet medics boiling bad water for the wounded because no other source existed. Lev unclipped the canteen. He poured a small amount into the tin cup. The child drank too fast, spilling half, then drank again with desperate care. Lev's mouth was already dry. Giving away water made his throat ache as if the city had reached up to charge him for it. The oldest boy reached into his coat and produced a rusted utility key. He spoke hoarsely in German and pointed down a narrow passage. Lev caught enough. Valve, cut off, bad water. The boy mimed turning a wheel, then gagged, hand to throat. A cut-off valve, a way to isolate contamination. Lev took the key. The metal was cold and filthy. Stay, he said in German. One simple word. No promises. He left them in the recess and pushed forward. The passage the boy indicated was older, rougher, lined with iron rings where pipes had once been mounted. The chemical bite strengthened. Lev's lamp picked out drag marks in damp grit, leading toward a broader corridor where concrete replaced brick and a faint electric hum lived in the walls. Footsteps echoed far behind them, measured, coordinated. Not ghosts. A team returning to check on its work. They reached a utility box half buried in sediment. Lev jammed the key into it. The lock resisted, then popped. Inside was a valve stem and a cracked gauge. Lev turned the valve to isolate a branch line. The needle dropped, and with it went one more route the poison could have taken once pressure returned. Lev's hands shook from exertion and thirst, and he felt the uneasy certainty that he had just created evidence of delay and diversion, even if the diversion saved lives. They moved into a larger chamber where thick cable conduits ran along the walls. In the center, a mass of iron gears and linkage rods rose like a dead machine's spine. Against it, pale and still, was a body wedged into the mechanism. Lev knew the shape before he saw the face. Professor Popov. Popov's torso was pressed into the gear teeth, arms stretched as if he had thrown himself in front of the linkage at the last second. The gear assembly was jammed by his weight. A rod ran from the jam toward a bracket on the wall. And there, mounted like an insect, was a clockwork detonator. Its dial was marked in minutes. On the wall behind Popov, dark streaks formed deliberate lines, numbers, parameters, pressure, rotation, valve angles, not heroics, instructions. Lev's chest tightened until breathing hurt. He pulled a pencil and copied the numbers onto paper, forcing his trembling hands to write clean. A wrong digit would be a massacre. The detonator ticked softly. The hand was close to zero. Footsteps drew closer. A metallic scrape at the chamber entrance. A shadow cut across Lev's lamp beam. Kuznetsov whispered, "They're here." Lev looked at his two men. Fuel leaked. Cables hummed. A single spark could turn the chamber into a furnace. He raised his submachine gun and spoke once, crisp, decisive. "We stop the blast, then we make sure we don't pressurize poison." Popov gave the safe range. "We follow it." Mikhailov's jaw clenched. "We were ordered to prevent sabotage, not to save Germans." "We were ordered to keep the line alive," Lev said. "Everyone drinks from it, including ours." Another shadow moved. The siege squeezed tighter. Lev stepped to the detonator with pliers in his hand and began to work. Lev did not cut the wire immediately. He inspected the bracket and leads, searching for the kind of trap a demolition man would leave for the first rescuer. Two lines ran into the linkage, one likely to the charge, another perhaps to a secondary trigger tied to movement. His lamp shook slightly as his hands shook, and he forced the tremor down with breath and will. He wedged a wrench into the gear teeth above Popov's shoulder, tightening the jam. Then he cut the primary lead. The tick stopped. No secondary click, no delayed snap. Silence. Clean, suspicious silence that felt like the chamber itself was listening. A figure stepped into the chamber. A boy in uniform too large for his frame, rifle held in shaking hands. Hitler Youth. He aimed not at Lev's chest, but at the detonator bracket, as if he understood exactly what mattered. The boy shouted in German, a mix of threat and panic. Lev did not reply. Replying was time. The boy advanced one step. Kuznetsov shifted, and the rag on his fuel leak slipped. A drop fell and spread on the wet floor. Lev fired 2 rounds into the concrete by the boy's boots. Chips flew. The boy froze, shock replacing courage. The echo, though, went racing down the tunnels like an announcement. Lev closed the distance, shoved the rifle barrel aside, and slammed the boy into the wall. The boy slid down, stunned. Lev left him alive. Killing him here would buy nothing but risk. He turned back to the panel. Old municipal hardware, German labeled, the kind built when Siemens machinery was meant to serve a city, not a battlefield. Some gauges were smashed. Others still held their needles like stubborn truths. Intake, outflow, bypass, auxiliary, main. Popov's numbers told him what to do in what order, and the order mattered because the room was wet, wired, and full of fuel fumes. Mikhailov took the entrance and listened. Lev used the orphan's key again, opening a second box to confirm the contaminated branch was sealed, then tightened the valve until his forearms burned. His mouth was sand. He could feel his own heartbeat in his temples. Footsteps multiplied outside. Careful, adult. Someone threw a pebble or bolt. It clattered in the corridor, testing response. Lev turned the intake gate wheel. Water groaned through pipes like a waking animal. The pressure gauge twitched upward. A cable conduit on the wall sparked. Blue, sharp, wet. Lev jerked back. Damaged insulation. The motor drawer would make those arcs worse. He used the wrench's handle to push the cable off the wet floor, then wedged it away with a brick fragment. The arcs diminished, but the warning remained. One bad contact, one careless burst of flame, and the room would become a torch. A shape appeared at the entrance with something in his hand. Grenade. Mikhailov fired a short, controlled burst into the floor in front of the man, forcing him back without striking metal near the panel. The man ducked away. Lev flipped the auxiliary switch. A hum rose. The motor tried, stuttered, then caught. Vibration filled the chamber as the pump's auxiliary system came alive. Lev watched the gauge climb and settle inside Popov's safe mark. He reached for the main switch. A grenade clinked into the chamber. Lev yanked Kuznetsov down by his strap and threw himself sideways. The blast was a wet concussion that sprayed dust and water. Lev felt brick fragments bite his cheek, the air filled with grit that turned breathing into labor. Kuznetsov coughed, then choked, a deeper sound. Blood bubbled at his lips. Lev pulled Kuznetsov's mask down over his face, forcing filtered air into him. Kuznetsov's eyes were wide, terrified, pleading, and Lev hated the seconds this cost him, even as he spent them. Lev crawled back to the panel. He flipped the main switch. The pump groaned, then surged. The impeller began to spin, heavy and relentless, making the floor vibrate like a living thing. The pressure gauge climbed toward Popov's line and settled. Water was moving. Then the smell shifted, phenols stronger, lifted by fresh flow through a contaminated segment. Lev's stomach turned. If he left it alone, the pump would distribute poison faster than any saboteur could by hand. He yanked the bypass valve open. Water roared into a side channel meant for flushing. The main pressure dipped. Lev eased the valve back a fraction to avoid cavitation and motor damage, then tightened the sealed branch again, narrowing the poison's path until it had nowhere useful left to go. Mikhailov shouted, "They're coming in!" Lev did not look. He bled a small test stream from a valve and caught it on a strip of cloth torn from his undershirt. The water ran cloudy at first. He brought the cloth to his nose. The chemical bite was still present but weaker. He bled again, clearer, less sting. It wasn't certainty. War didn't offer that. But it was enough to keep the motor running without turning the city into a delivery system for death. Kuznetsov screamed. His tank strap snapped, the cylinder shifting and scraping toward the hot cable conduit. A blue arc leapt. Sparks showered, dancing inches from the fuel film. Lev lunged, grabbed the tank, and hauled it away with both hands. Heat burned through his gloves. He shoved the cylinder into a drier corner and slammed the loose conduit bracket away from the floor with his wrench. The arc snapped once more, then died, leaving the chamber humming and Lev's palms throbbing with pain that threatened to shake every later movement. An adult German rushed the entrance carrying a satchel charge, eyes fixed on the panel. Lev fired low, shattering the man's legs before he could plant it. The man slid across the wet floor. The satchel bounced free and skidded toward fuel. Lev threw himself forward, grabbed the strap, and dragged it behind a concrete pillar, far enough away that a flash would not take the panel with it. He returned to the gauges and forced himself to stay inside Popov's range. Steady pressure, sealed branch, controlled flushing, because anything else would turn his rescue into a faster kind of killing. Popov's corpse remained jammed in the gears, the dead engineer acting as the machine's final brake. Lev did not move him. He could not afford to. The pump kept turning. The chamber's hum became a heartbeat. Lev could feel in his bones. Mikhailov held the entrance, firing only when forced, his bursts short, disciplined, aimed to buy seconds without igniting the room. Kuznetsov slumped against the wall, mask on, breathing ragged, his hands still wrapped around the flamethrower controls as if they could keep him alive. Lev adjusted the bypass in small increments to flush the contaminated segment while keeping main pressure within Popov's range. His hands trembled from thirst and pain, and each adjustment was an act of will rather than strength. Then he heard it through the pipes, the hollow, rushing sound of a vertical riser filling, moving upward toward the surface. A city's arteries opening. The sound was faint, but Lev recognized it the way a musician recognizes an instrument. He checked a secondary output gauge labeled for a district line. The needle crept upward, then steadied. That line fed older neighborhoods with dense hydrant coverage. Systems built decades earlier when Breslau's waterworks had been designed to fight fires long before this war found new uses for old infrastructure. A distant clang echoed down the pipe. Metal struck above, like someone forcing open a hydrant valve. Then a hiss. Lev imagined dirty spittle at first, then a stream. He could not see it, but the gauge behavior and the sound told him enough. A wave of dizziness hit him so hard he had to grab the wall. He tasted metal. His earlier choice, giving his canteen water to children, came due now as weakness. He forced breath through the maskless air and did not let himself sink. Mikhailov glanced back, eyes sharp. "They're pulling back," he said. "Because they can hear it," Lev replied. "They know they missed their moment." The footsteps outside faded. A shouted German command echoed, then retreating boots. Lev did not believe gone until the silence held long enough to become real. He kept the pump running anyway. The last days of a siege were full of men who destroyed things because they could no longer keep them. Kuznetsov coughed and slid lower. Lev knelt beside him. Blood stained the filter. Kuznetsov's eyes were unfocused. "Did it work?" he whispered through the mask. "It's working," Lev said. "The city has water." Kuznetsov exhaled, relief collapsing into exhaustion. His eyes closed. Lev did not know if the man was sleeping or leaving. Lev returned to the panel and made one more mark on the wall with his pencil. A crude arrow and 2 numbers, the bypass setting that held safe pressure. Not history. A note for whoever might come next. He looked at Popov one last time. The professor had not left a speech, only parameters and a dead body wedged into gears. Lev felt a grim gratitude. Popov had died doing the one thing engineers did best, stopping failure by becoming part of the system. Lev and Mikhailov lifted Kuznetsov between them and began the return through the tunnels. Without adrenaline, every step hurt. The air stank of fuel, damp brick, and chemical residue that clung to the throat. They passed the side chamber where the children had been. The recess was empty. Lev's heart clenched until he saw faint, wet footprints, small, hurried, leading into another passage. They had moved, alive. That was all the proof he would ever get. At the vibration mine corridor, the earlier crater lay damp and quiet. They stepped over it. At the choke point, mud still trickled from the ceiling cracks. Lev shoved through, shoulder-scraping brick, feeling the city's weight above them like a judgment. They climbed a service shaft toward daylight. The air warmed. Smoke replaced sewage. By the time Lev emerged, it was May 6, 1945, and sunlight struck his eyes like a blow. Breslau, above ground, was a skeleton. Blocks were gutted, streets torn, walls blackened. Soviet tanks rolled toward the center where surrender would be formalized. The fortress myth had days ago outlived its purpose. Lev had heard the rumors in the trenches. Gauleiter Hanke had fled the city the day before in a small liaison plane, leaving others to choke on his orders. Lev had no proof. Down in the tunnels, proof had been a ticking clock and phenol stink. Clean water pooled in a shell crater near the shaft, reflecting the sky like an insult. Lev stared at it until his vision blurred. Officers approached. Cleaner uniforms, harder mouths. A captain looked Lev up and down as if turning him into a report. Name: Lev Arsenyevich, Independent 24th Engineer Battalion. You were ordered to prevent sabotage, the captain said. Did you? Yes, hub secured, pump running, contaminated branch isolated, bypass flushing. The captain's pen scratched. And I hear you delayed, he added. I hear you gave water to civilians. Mikhailov shifted beside Lev. Lev felt the pressure of testimony forming, the war's other machinery gearing up. They were children, Lev said. These are the enemy's children. Lev did not argue ideology, he argued function. Poisoned water kills our wounded too. The key they gave me let me isolate the branch. The objective was not compromised. The captain did not call him a liar. He did not praise him. He simply wrote another line and closed the notebook as if the matter was settled. Report later, the captain said. Lev walked away on legs that felt borrowed. Near a shattered wall, he saw the children again, the oldest boy among them. A fire hydrant had been twisted by shelling, its valve torn open. Water poured in a steady stream. The children cupped their hands and washed soot from their faces with the concentration of people performing a ritual to prove they were still human. Lev stopped. No one thanked him. No one needed to. The scene was its own verdict. He sat on broken masonry beside the hydrant. Water ran past his boots toward gutters choked with ash, flowing to strangers who would never know his name. That was how civic systems worked. That was also how redemption worked when it was real, anonymous, indifferent, moving anyway. He unclipped his old canteen. It was nearly empty now. He held it and felt the dents, the scratched Cyrillic line Popov had once carved. He could carry it forward into whatever came after. The paperwork, the cold questions, the quiet punishments, or he could leave it here, beside the hydrant's clean stream, as a private admission that the old life was over. Lev set the canteen on the stone and let his hand linger for half a second longer than necessary, as if the metal might still be warm. Tanks rumbled toward the city center. Somewhere men signed papers, somewhere the fortress ended with ink. Here water kept running, and children washed their faces in the aftermath of orders meant to burn everything. Lev watched the stream until the roar became the only sound he trusted.